There is nothing quite like a breakfast brunch at an international hotel. We've got breakfast sausage. We've got something, I'm not sure what it is, sweet and sour pork, green beans, chocolate and blueberry cheesecake, and yes, I'm going to go get an omelet later. Hi, this is the fourth in our 9/11 series. We're looking at Numbers 9/11. And I'm back from that amazing restaurant and that international brunch I just had. And it's got me wondering what we have in our cabinets that I could kind of concoct for a little snack. We've got all kinds of spices in here. Some sweet, some salty, some have some unique international flavors. The passage that we're looking at today talks about some folks who had missed the Passover meal. A meal that was prescribed by God to have in the 14th day of the first month of every year for them. And they had been unclean during that day. Maybe they'd come in contact with a dead body or been on a journey. And so they come to Moses and say, Moses, we want to have this meal. And it's very symbolic, very special about what God has done for us. So Moses takes the issue to God. And God says, yes, not only should they have it, they must have it. Let them have it a month later, on the 14th of the second month. And make sure they have the Passover lamb, the unleavened bread, and the bitter herbs. Sort of like that international brunch. Some strange combinations kind of put together. But each one of those things had specific symbolic value to the Israelites of what God had done for them. The Passover meal was to remind them that they were saved at the sacrifice of another's life. That God passed over, the death angel passed over their house because they had the mark of the blood on the doorpost to show that their faith was in God's accepting the sacrifice of another. Reminds us of Jesus' sacrifice, that they didn't save themselves. It was the sacrifice of another. The unleavened bread reminds them of the power of God, that He saved them so quickly that they didn't even have time to let their bread rise. And we too still have that same God today who can save us quickly. And the bitter herbs were to remind them that the life they were leading was a life of suffering. I wonder what is on your plate of salvation. In my line of work, we often say there's a lot on my plate, meaning there's a lot of stuff to do. And sometimes we say, well, we can't eat it all, we got to push some things off. And so I'm wondering, we as Christians, what do we accept, or what are we willing to eat from God? He says that we've got to accept, even feed on His body, namely that we trust in His death for our salvation and not our own works, that we are willing to quickly leave sin and acknowledge that He can powerfully and quickly take us out of that life of sin. And we are to remember that going back would be a life of suffering, that He brought us out of that suffering. I think if we have an unbalanced diet, if we forget about His salvation through Jesus' sacrifice, or if we forget about His power to take us out of sin and temptation quickly, or we forget about the fact that our past life was suffering, any part of that we neglect, and it's an unbalanced diet with the Lord, remember His love for you. Remember His power for you. Remember that He is holy, and He calls you to lead that life of suffering into a new life of joy. May God bless you as you follow Him.